My name is Colonel Rebecca Lawson, United States Air Force, and on the night my father married his second wife inside the dim wood-paneled reception hall of the Midland County VFW, he lifted a glass of cheap champagne pointed straight at me and laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's just a reject," he said. The words hit me harder than any turbulence I've ever ridden through at 30,000 feet. They didn't roll off my back. They landed sharp and stayed. I was standing near the back of the hall cradling a paper cup of coffee that tasted like scorched grounds and styrofoam. The place smelled like pulled pork, fried okra, and cigarette smoke that drifted in every time someone cracked the side door. A Conway Twitty track rolled out from the DJ's cracked speakers, the bass fuzzy, the floor sticky from spilled beer. Folding chairs squeaked against linoleum. It was all so ordinary, so small-town American, and yet, in that instant, it felt like the whole world had turned its eyes on me. Dad puffed his chest and turned toward Ashley, the daughter of his new wife, Denise. She stood beside him in a pink dress that was one size too tight, her hair sprayed stiff and shining. She smirked, maybe proud, maybe embarrassed, I couldn't tell. Dad wrapped an arm around her shoulders and said, "This is my real daughter. This one carries my name right." The sound in the hall died. Forks scraped to a halt against paper plates. Someone coughed. Aunt Carol muttered under her breath, "For God's sake, Hal." Somebody else chuckled nervously, thinking maybe it was a joke, but it wasn't. Dad leaned into it. He meant every word. I stared into the bitter coffee and thought about setting it down, walking out, never coming back. That's the thing about humiliation, it isn't just the insult, it's the silence afterward. The way people's eyes slide off you, not wanting to be caught taking a side. That silence can weigh more than the words themselves. I didn't argue. I didn't shout across the hall. That's never been my way. The Air Force taught me discipline, but the truth is, I'd been practicing it long before I signed those enlistment papers. I just put the cup down on a plastic-covered table, nodded to the young bartender in his bow-tie vest and said, "Water's fine. Thanks." Then I stepped outside. The parking lot baked from the day's sun, still radiating heat, though the sky was deepening into a Texas sunset orange bleeding into purple. Cicadas screamed from the mesquite trees along the edge of the lot. A couple of old vets in ball caps smoked by the door, telling stories I couldn't hear. They looked at me, then looked away, uncertain how to stand with me, or whether to stand at all. Folks never know what to do in moments like that. I leaned against my car, a gray Chevy Malibu dull from years of highway miles, and drew a deep breath. The air smelled of cut grass, hot asphalt, and cheap cologne drifting from the open doors. Laughter picked up again inside. Dad's voice carried bragging, telling stories like he always did when he had an audience and a little alcohol in him. I imagined him two-stepping stiff-legged with Denise, the new bride, while Ashley basked in the glow of being called the real daughter. And me, I stood outside alone, staring at the garment bag in the trunk. Inside it was my uniform, blues pressed sharp metals in neat rows, wings gleaming. I hadn't planned on wearing it tonight. This was Dad's day, not mine. I thought coming in plain clothes would keep the peace. But as the cicadas hummed and the laughter spilled out, I felt the weight of that uniform pressing against me from behind the trunk lid. The truth of who I was, every hour of flight training, every mission, every loss carried home in silence, sat right there, waiting. And yet all my father could see, all he wanted anyone else to see, was a word that cut back to my childhood. Reject. I closed my eyes. I thought of Mom, long gone now, who used to say, "Becky, you don't have to fight every fight, but the ones you do pick, fight them clean." Her voice was steadier than the night air, steadier than the throb of country music seeping through the walls. So I stayed there longer than I should have, letting the cicadas drown out the echo of his toast. I thought about walking back in. I thought about disappearing down I-20 and never looking back. But mostly, I thought about that one word rolling around in my head, heavy as lead. Reject. I wasn't sure yet how I would answer it. I only knew I couldn't let it be the last word. I was born in Midland, Texas, in the summer of 1982, in a duplex that rattled when the wind kicked up across the flat plains. Back then, oil money kept some families rich, but not ours. My mom, Mary Lawson, worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital. She'd come home after midnight with the smell of antiseptic and cafeteria coffee still clinging to her scrubs, her feet swollen, her hair pinned tight, but falling loose at the edges. She was small, barely 5'3", but she had a backbone like steel. Dad wasn't around much. When he was, he had a knack for turning good evenings sour. He ran a struggling HVAC business that mostly kept him on the road, and sometimes he'd disappear for weeks at a time. When he did show up, he liked to sit in his recliner with a Lone Star beer shouting at the TV or at us. He could make you feel small with just a sentence. I was maybe 10 when he first told me, "Girls don't fly planes, Becky. Don't get silly ideas." That line landed in me the way his toast at the wedding did years later, sharp, heavy, unforgettable. But by then the dream had already been planted. One sweltering July afternoon, Mom had taken me to an air show at Dyess Air Force Base over in Abilene. I remember standing on the blacktop, the sun burning my shoulders, watching an F-16 scream overhead. It tilted dove, then roared back into the sky, the kind of sound that rattled in your ribs and left you grinning without knowing why. I told Mom right then, I want to do that. I want to be up there. She looked at me, tired but smiling, and said, "Then you'd better get used to working harder than anybody else." And I did. My friends in middle school spent weekends riding bikes and sneaking into the movies. I spent mine mowing lawns, delivering papers before dawn, anything that earned a couple of bucks I could stash away. I wasn't saving for cassettes or new sneakers. I was saving for flying lessons. At 14, I scraped together enough for a single half hour in a rickety Cessna with an instructor who smelled of pipe smoke and motor oil. The plane felt fragile like a tin can with wings, but when we lifted off and the houses below shrank into Monopoly pieces, I felt something settle in me, like I'd finally found the place I belonged. At school, I kept my head down. I wasn't the prettiest or the most popular, but I was steady. Teachers wrote words like persistent and focused on my report cards. I didn't take it as praise at the time. To me, it was survival. Dad didn't show up for the air show, or for my flying lesson, or for the school talent night where I tried to explain aerodynamics with a model airplane. He liked to say, "That girl's never gonna be more than her mama." He thought it was an insult. I took it as the highest compliment he could have given. By high school, the gap between me and my classmates widened. They were talking about college parties, boyfriends, weddings before 20. I was spending nights poring over library books about aviation and military history. I learned the names of women who had broken barriers before me: Amelia Earhart, Jackie Cochran, Jeannie Leavitt. I taped their photos inside my locker, reminders that it wasn't impossible, just harder. Mom tried to shield me from Dad's barbed words, but you can't block everything. I learned to listen, to tuck the hurt deep, and to turn it into fuel. The summer after graduation, while my friends packed for Texas Tech or lined up jobs at oil rigs and car lots, I walked into the Air Force recruiter's office on the corner of Illinois Avenue. The sergeant behind the desk looked at me over his mustache and said, "You sure about this, Miss? Flight school ain't easy." I nodded. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady, "I'm sure." I signed the papers that afternoon. That night, Mom cried at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. She wasn't crying because she didn't want me to go. She was crying because she knew I had to. She reached across, squeezed my hand, and said, "Rebecca, you want out. You earn it. Nobody hands it to you. Not in this life." 2 weeks later, I boarded a Greyhound bus headed east with a duffel bag, $50 in cash, and a worn paperback copy of The Right Stuff tucked into the side pocket. The Texas plains rolled by outside the window, brown and endless. I leaned my head against the glass and promised myself something: I would never again let anyone, not Dad, not anybody, decide my worth for me. That promise has carried me through every storm since. The Greyhound bus rumbled across Texas like it had no hurry in the world, but I was in a rush. I was 18, carrying a cheap duffel bag, and a promise I'd made to myself: never let anyone decide my worth again. When the bus hissed to a stop outside Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, the air was heavy with humidity and nerves. I stepped off in scuffed sneakers, my palms sweating, my stomach twisted in knots. Basic training didn't care about your nerves. It chewed you up the first morning with the bark of drill instructors, the echo of boots pounding asphalt, and the sharp sting of realizing that whatever you thought you knew about discipline wasn't enough. Lawson, one of them, bellowed, his campaign hat shadowing his eyes. "You think that ponytail is going to get you through my flight line? Cut it. Now." "Yes, sir." My voice cracked, but I said it anyway. Those first weeks were blister and bruise sweat soaking through t-shirts until they clung like a second skin. Push-ups on gravel until my palms bled. Marching in step until I dreamed cadence in my sleep. I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the strongest, but I was steady. And steadiness counts for more than flash when the days start running together. When we weren't sweating in formation, we were crammed in classrooms with binders thicker than Bibles, learning everything from aircraft recognition to emergency procedures. I clung to every page like it was a rung on a ladder out of Midland. By the time I earned a slot at undergraduate pilot training, I had no illusions left about how hard it would be. I walked onto the flight line in Del Rio under a sun that felt like it wanted to burn holes straight through your flight suit. The T-6 Texan II trainers gleamed on the tarmac, little prop planes with more bite than they looked. The first time I climbed into the cockpit, my hands shook as I strapped in. The oxygen mask smelled of rubber and disinfectant, the canopy sealed with a hiss, and suddenly it was just me, the instructor in the back seat, and a whole sky waiting. We rolled down the runway, engine screaming, the ground blurring. My heart climbed into my throat. Then lift. The wheels left asphalt, and West Texas spread out beneath me like a patchwork quilt of brown and gold. Houses shrank to Monopoly pieces, roads to pencil lines. I felt weightless and grounded at the same time. That night, I called Mom from the payphone in the barracks hallway. "I did it," I whispered, voice hoarse. "I actually flew." She laughed soft through the static. "I knew you would, Becky. Just remember, it's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Not everyone wanted me there. Some classmates made bets I wouldn't last past phase 2. One instructor, a captain with too much swagger and not enough sense, liked to call me Sweetheart instead of Lieutenant Lawson. "Sweetheart, you sure you can handle the G-forces without passing out?" he'd sneer. I learned not to flinch. The best revenge wasn't snapping back. It was climbing into that cockpit, pulling 6 Gs through a loop, and landing smoother than half the men in my class. When the T-38 jets came sleek and sharp, I fell in love all over again. They moved faster, demanded more, punished mistakes. The cockpit rattled when you pushed the throttle forward, but when the afterburner kicked, you felt like the air itself was splitting for you. I made mistakes, plenty of them. I came in too hot on a landing once and bounced the jet so hard my instructor cursed loud enough to rattle my headset. Another time, I botched a formation maneuver and had to buy beers for the whole class. But I learned. I adjusted. Every failure was a step, not a wall. On weekends, while some cadets partied, I stayed in the hangar or buried in manuals. I wasn't just trying to graduate. I was building a life where nobody could ever again look at me and see reject. There were nights I lay awake in my bunk, staring at the ceiling fan creaking overhead, hearing Dad's voice in my head. "Girls don't fly." And then I'd picture that F-16 roaring over Midland, the sound that had lit a fire in me years before. That memory carried me. When the day finally came for assignment night, the hangar was packed with cadets in pressed blues, the air electric with anticipation. The colonel called names, handing out billets like a poker dealer with a stacked deck. Lawson Rebecca, F-16 Fighting Falcon. For a second I couldn't breathe. My classmates cheered, some slapped my back, a few just stared. I'd done it. I was headed for the very jet that had stolen my heart when I was 10 years old, standing in that air show crowd. That night I wrote a letter to Mom. Mom, I got the Falcon. I'm gonna fly it for real. I'll carry us both every time I take off. I didn't write to Dad. By then I knew better. The wings on my chest weren't just metal. They were proof. Proof that persistence beats doubt, that steadiness beats swagger, that a girl from Midland with nothing but grit and a dream could carve her way into the sky. The desert didn't care where you came from. It didn't care if you'd clawed your way out of Midland, Texas, or if you'd coasted through prep school with your daddy's money. Out there, the air burned your lungs, the sand scoured your skin, and the sun warped the horizon until rifles were too hot to touch. The desert stripped everything false away and left you with the bare truth of who you were. By the time I deployed to Afghanistan, I was 26 and newly minted on the F-16. We flew out of Bagram, the airfield ringed with HESCO barriers and mountains that looked older than time itself. The base smelled of diesel fuel dust and sweat. Helicopters thumped day and night, and mortars sometimes punctuated dinner like an uninvited guest. My first combat mission was close air support for a convoy pinned down on a rocky road in Kunar province. I remember the call crackling in my headset, the JTAC's voice tense. Taking fire, need angels overhead now. My palms went slick against the throttle, but training steadied me. I rolled the jet into a dive, scanning the ground smoke tracers, chaos. Lawson 2-1, tally target, request permission, hot. The words came automatic, but inside my heart hammered. Cleared, hot. I squeezed the trigger and the Falcon's nose spit fire. Rockets streaked down, kicking up dirt and shrapnel. Enemy fire scattered. The convoy moved. I pulled back on the stick, climbing hard into the blue lungs, finally filling. That day, I saved lives. I didn't know their names, but the thought that some soldier would go home to his family because I'd stayed steady, that carried me. But combat isn't just heroics. It's also silence. It's the letters you write when pilots don't make it back. It's the folded flag handed to a widow with shaking hands. It's sitting on your bunk staring at the floor boots, still on, hearing the echo of laughter from a man who isn't alive anymore. One night after a mission, I sat on a sandbag wall with Captain Ortiz, a grizzled Marine pilot with laugh lines carved deep from too many years in the sun. He lit a cigarette, handed me one, though I didn't smoke. "You flew clean today," he said. I was scared, I admitted. He shrugged. "Fear just means you're still alive to do the job. Cocky pilots get themselves killed. Keep the fear. Use it." I carried those words with me. There were missions that blurred together, long nights refueling in mid-air days, when dust storms grounded us, and hours staring at radar screens waiting for a call that might not come. But some stand out like scars. Once a medevac helicopter convoy was ambushed on a ridge road. The Blackhawks took fire, one pilot wounded. We were scrambled fast. I screamed over that ridge so low I thought my tail would clip rock. I fired flares, strafed the ridgeline, kept the enemy heads down while the medevacs limped out. Later, I learned one of the wounded soldiers on board survived because they got out in time. I never knew her name then. I just knew that for a moment, all the sweat, all the doubt, all the silence, it meant something. Back at Bagram, the bunks smelled of dust and tired bodies. Meals were powdered eggs, mystery meat coffee that tasted like motor oil. Sometimes I'd write to Mom, still flying, still steady. "Don't worry about me." I never wrote to Dad. I knew what he'd say if he said anything at all. The longer I stayed, the heavier the burden grew. Each mission carried lives in its balance. Each decision weighed more than the last. When you're young, you think the medals will mean something. But the truth. They sit in a box back home, ribbons fading. What stays with you are the faces of people you saved and the faces of the ones you couldn't. By the end of that deployment, I was leaner, harder, and quieter. I had learned that war doesn't give you glory. It gives you scars, visible and invisible. It teaches you the value of discipline, of steadiness, of showing up when others falter. When I finally stepped off the plane stateside, the air felt too thick, too green, too alive. Families clutched soldiers in hugs that looked like they would never let go. Mom was there for me, her arms thin but strong. She held on tight, whispered, "You did it, Becky. You made it." Dad wasn't there. I didn't expect him. I carried the desert home inside me, the smell of diesel, the buzz of cicadas that now sounded too much like distant mortars, the weight of silence. And though I wore the uniform proudly, though I carried the call sign of a combat pilot, I knew I wasn't finished proving myself. Not to the Air Force, not to my country. And though I hated admitting it, not even to the man who called me reject. I didn't want to go. Truth be told, if it hadn't been for Aunt Carol calling 3 times in a row, I never would have driven down to Dad's second wedding in the first place. Rebecca, she'd said over the phone, her voice soft and pleading, "I know how he is. Lord knows I know. But it'd be decent if you showed your face. Just for me." I owed her. Aunt Carol had slipped me $20 bills when I was in high school, told me to buy gas or books, and never asked for it back. She'd driven me to the bus station the morning I shipped out. She'd never missed a Christmas card, not one. So I told her I'd come. Not for Dad. For her. The drive down I-20 was familiar and heavy, the road stretching flat and endless billboards for Cracker Barrel and oil field companies dotting the horizon. My Chevy Malibu hummed steady, the same dull gray car I'd been leaning against in that parking lot all those years. In the trunk, my dress blues hung in a garment bag, polished shoes tucked neatly beneath. I hadn't planned on wearing them. This was his day, not mine. I pulled on a navy dress instead, plain flats, nothing that would turn heads. The reception was at the Midland VFW Hall, wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, paper streamers sagging from the ceiling. The place smelled like pulled pork potato salad and cheap cologne. A DJ in the corner tested the speakers with George Strait. Folding chairs scraped as folks shifted around long tables covered in plastic cloths. I walked in quiet, nodding to cousins I hadn't seen in years. Some waved, some whispered. Denise, Dad's new bride, greeted me with a tight hug that smelled of perfume, too sweet. "Rebecca," she said, her smile, stiff eyes darting. "So glad you came." Her daughter Ashley stood right beside her. 26, blonde, teased high, a pink dress clinging like shrink-wrap wine glass already in hand. She gave me a once-over and smirked. "Hey, you must be Dad's first kid." I just nodded. That's right. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the urn, the kind that tastes like burnt styrofoam, and found a spot at the back table near the exit. That's where I was when the toast started. Dad rose, glass in hand, suit sagging on his shoulders. His hair was slicked back, his smile broad with drink and pride. The room hushed. For one long second I thought maybe he'd surprise me, say something kind. Instead, he pointed right at me. "She's just a reject." He laughed, the words slicing through the hall. The air went cold. Forks clinked to a stop. Aunt Carol gasped, "Hal, for God's sake." Somebody chuckled nervously, but Dad leaned into it, his voice swelling. "This here," he said, draping his arm around Ashley, "this is my real daughter. The one who carries my name right." Ashley giggled, cheeks flushed from wine and attention. Denise clapped her hands like she'd just won a prize. And me, I set my cup down. My hand didn't shake. I looked at the bartender, a kid in a bow tie vest, and said, "Water's fine. Thanks." Then I slipped out the side door. The parking lot hit me with a wave of hot night air. The cicadas buzzed like static in the mesquite trees. I leaned against my Malibu, eyes on the garment bag in the trunk. That uniform had seen deserts and skies, carried me through fire and loss. 2 rows of ribbons pilot wings rank-stitched on my shoulders. It wasn't vanity that made me bring it. It was habit. And now standing there, I wondered if maybe it was something more. My phone buzzed. A number I hadn't dialed in years. Captain Ortiz retired now, but once my wingman. His voice was gravelly when I answered. General, he teased, though I was only a colonel. Heard you're back stateside. How you holding up? I swallowed hard. I'm at my dad's wedding. He stood up in front of everyone and called me a reject. There was silence then, a dry chuckle. Same old Hal, huh? What are you thinking? I stared at the trunk at the garment bag inside. Part of me wants to put the uniform on, walk back in there, but maybe that's petty. Ortiz's voice steadied. You earned that uniform, Becky. Every stitch. Wearing it isn't petty. It's the truth. Don't shout. Don't fight dirty. Just stand in what's yours. His words hung there clear as the cicadas. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, remembered Mom's voice. The fights you pick, fight them clean. Inside laughter picked up again, muffled through the walls. Ashley's giggle, Dad's brag, Denise's high-pitched cheer. Out here, it was just me, the Texas heat, and the steady truth waiting in the trunk of my car. The air inside the VFW was cooler than the parking lot, but when I stepped back through the doors in full uniform, it felt like the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Conversations died mid-sentence. The fiddle tune on the DJ's speakers cut sharp. Chairs creaked as people turned. I walked slow heels clicking against the linoleum. Blue dress uniform pressed sharp ribbons in neat rows, silver oak leaves on my shoulders glinting under fluorescent lights. My cover sat square on my head. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't said a word. But the uniform spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. A cousin near the buffet whispered, "Good Lord." Another muttered, "She's an officer. That's colonel rank, isn't it?" Dad froze at the head table, Denise's hand looped through his arm. His grin faltered, then stiffened into something sour. Ashley, glass of wine halfway to her lips, saw me and froze. Her cheeks drained of color. The smirk she'd worn all evening slid clean off her face. I kept walking, each step steady, measured. When I reached the front, I turned to face the room. I came tonight to wish my father well, I said, voice calm even. Not for speeches, not for insults. Just to stand as who I am. The silence was thick, eyes darting from me to Dad, back again. My chest rose and fell steady. I didn't flinch. Then Ashley's voice cracked high and loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh my God. She's the pilot who saved my life. The words hit like a spotlight swung across the hall. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Saved her life. What's she talking about? Ashley's hand trembled, wine sloshing in her glass. Her eyes locked on me wide with something between fear and awe. It was you. That convoy, 3 years ago outside Kandahar. We were hit. Our Humvee took fire, the medevac was late. A fighter jet dropped in, strafed the ridge, cleared the road so we could get out. The pilot saved us. Saved me. She shook her head, voice breaking. That was you. The room drew a collective breath. I didn't move, didn't smile. Just let the truth hang there. Because she was right. I remembered that mission like a scar. I'd flown low, too low, flares spitting from the Falcon's belly, bullets chewing dirt inches from friendlies. I'd prayed I wouldn't clip the ridge. I'd prayed harder that they'd live. I never knew names. Didn't ask. That wasn't the job. But now the names stood there in pink satin and trembling hands. Dad's face went slack. For the first time, I could remember he had no words. Denise's smile wavered, faltered. The cousins at the table shifted, eyes wide, forks forgotten. I looked at Ashley, held her gaze. I was doing my job. That's all. But inside, something shifted. All those years, Dad's voice calling me nothing but a reject. And yet, in front of everyone, the daughter he'd called perfect was saying she owed her life to me. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. The truth was enough. The silence stretched broken, finally by Aunt Carol's shaky voice. Rebecca, honey. Her hands clapped together once, twice. The sound echoed. Then another cousin joined. Then another. Until the hall filled with applause, scattered at first, then swelling. In the back, two old vets stood, stiff backs, creaking hands raised in salute. I didn't cry. I didn't bow. I just stood in the uniform I'd earned, steady as stone. Dad's eyes burned into me, jaw tight. But he didn't speak. Not a denial. Not a word. He couldn't. Not anymore. Ashley lowered her glass voice, barely a whisper now. You're the reason I'm alive. And for the first time that night, I felt clean. The applause faded slow like waves pulling back from shore, but the weight of it stayed. Folks wiped their eyes. Some nodded. Some just stared at me as if they'd never seen me before. Maybe they hadn't. Not really. Not as I was now standing in the uniform I had bled and sweated into, the truth stitched into every seam. I didn't linger at the front. I didn't want spectacle. I turned, stepped away from the head table, heels clicking against linoleum as the clapping carried me toward the door. Hands reached out along the way, cousins I barely knew, church ladies with trembling fingers, even old high school acquaintances who whispered, "Thank you for your service, ma'am." I shook each hand, nodded each nod. Steady. Always steady. Outside, the night was thick with Texas heat. Cicadas buzzed, the smell of barbecue smoke, and spilled beer drifting into the lot. I leaned against my Malibu, same as before, the stars above sharp and clear. The door creaked and people spilled out one by one like they needed fresh air after what they'd just witnessed. An old Vietnam vet in a ball cap shuffled up back, bent eyes clouded but sharp enough to fix on me. He stuck out his hand. "Proud of you, ma'am," he rasped. "We needed pilots like you back then." I shook his hand firm. "Thank you. And thank you for your service." A woman I vaguely remembered from church potlucks pressed my hand between hers. Her voice trembled. "Your mama would be so proud." Tears glistened in her eyes before she turned back inside. Ashley came out next, her pink dress wilting under the porchlight wine glass abandoned somewhere. She hesitated, fiddled with her clutch, then walked toward me. Her voice was small, almost childlike. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." I studied her face, just a kid, really. 26, too much blush breath, still sweet with wine. "You don't have to know everything yet," I said evenly. "But you do need to be honest. Always. That uniform doesn't care about last names. It cares about truth." Her chin trembled. She nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Then she slipped back inside, quieter than she'd been all night. Dad never came out. Not that night. But a week later, I stood on the parade deck at Randolph Air Force Base, presiding over a change of command. Families filled folding chairs, flags snapped sharp in the wind, the band played proud and steady. After the ceremony, as I stepped down from the podium, shaking hands, taking photos with young lieutenants, I saw him. Dad. Sports coat, a size too big tie, crooked hair thinner than I remembered. No Denise. No Ashley. Just him. He waited his turn in the line like any other guest. When he reached me, he didn't puff his chest or smirk. His hand shook as he extended it. And then, in a voice rough but loud enough for those around to hear, he said, "My daughter, Colonel Rebecca Lawson." Not reject, not nothing. My daughter. The words were plain, almost awkward, but they were real. And they settled deeper than his insult ever had. I shook his hand steady. "Thank you." No reconciliation hug, no storybook ending. Just a correction, small, public, clean. And sometimes, that's enough. That evening, I drove home with the windows rolled down I-20, humming beneath my tires. The sky stretched wide and gold cicadas buzzing in the mesquite. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Here's what I learned. Family can wound you in ways no battlefield ever will. But those wounds don't define you. What defines you is the work, the showing up, the steady truth you carry. Medals fade, applause fades, but dignity that stays. If you've carried insults, words meant to cut you down, don't let them stick. Stand in your truth, clean, steady, earned. And if this story reached you, if it reminded you of your own worth, share it. Pass it along. Someone out there needs to hear that they're not the worst thing ever said about them. They're more. You're more. Thank you for listening.